All right, I think the time has come for us to start talking about control structures. Control structures, just like in other languages, are statements that we can include in our code which will alter the order of the execution of the statements that make up our script, that make up our program. So here I'm talking about things like if statements and while loops, things that I'm sure you have probably dealt with before. Since, again, this is probably something that you're already vaguely familiar with at least, I won't spend too much time talking about the basics. Instead, let's just jump in and see how these things actually work in PHP. For starters, what I've done here is I've put together a little example. Right now in the browser, it actually looks like this. It has a very simple little form in it with a single text field that says input next to it. In the actual code itself, the way I have this put together is the basics, what you'd expect, a simple form. I have this form submitting back to this page, so this is a self-submitting script, if you want to think of it that way. It submits its data using post, and then the actual text field itself down here is actually called input. That's the name of the field. I also here in the body have a level 2 header that I've defined. Inside of it I have a set of PHP statements with an echo in it that's going to echo out a PHP variable called output. And up at the very top of my document I have defined that variable and simply assigned it the value of an empty string. So right now we don't actually see any sign of that in the browser. If I were to put something into my text field and go ahead and submit it, everything works okay, no errors. We could look at the actual code to be sure. Yeah, no errors. But it doesn't actually do anything at the moment either. Every time the page submits, whether it's the script submitting back to itself or whether it's an initial request to the script, basically the same thing happens. The output variable is declared, it's blank, it outputs that blank. We can't really see that, and the form is there. That's really all there is to it. One of the very first things I think I want to do is I want to set it up so that whatever input I happen to provide when I submit the form appears to stay inside the actual text field itself. So here I'm saying that when I go to my text field and I type in test, for example, and I submit, I would like to still see the word test there. Now, saying that the value is going to stay in the field is inaccurate because the field itself isn't even the same field. When we first request the page, we get output from the server, which includes code for a text field, and then when I submit this form, we send a new request to the server then sends back a new copy of the form. So technically, depending on how you look at it, I guess it's not even exactly the same text field, but to the user, I would like for it to appear that the text they put in stays there in the text field. I could do that by coming down to the actual text field code itself, and where the value goes right here, I could say echo, and I'm going to say to echo from the post array the value called input. So whatever input had been received, redisplay that value as the default in that text field. So now if I go to that text field and I type in blah, it looks like blah stays there. Now, actually, technically, the form is being regenerated, and the new copy of that form that's then sent to the browser already includes the blah. If I put in 123, the 123 appears to stay there. If I go back and I refresh this script, I'm going to go up to the address bar and hit the enter key. At that point, something else shows up in my text field. What's actually showing up there now, we can most easily see if we look at the code that was downloaded from the server. There it is. When I look here at my text field, what's actually happening at this point is inside the value attribute for that text field, I'm getting a PHP error displayed right there. Because of where the error is actually showing up, it's causing it to appear as content inside the text field itself. The error is a notice saying that I have an undefined index called input. The problem there is that I am trying to access something called input in the post array, which doesn't exist. When I visited this page as a fresh request, not having submitted anything, there is no input in the post array, which is the reason for that error. How could we deal with that? Well, in a previous example, what we did was we created a variable, let's say it's called input, and then I could say is set $_post input. So if there is an input in the post array, then post input's value is what will be assigned to the input variable. Otherwise, I could say assign nothing, kind of a default. So that's what we had done in a previous example. Let's check that out and see if that works. If I go back to the page fresh, actually it doesn't look like it is. Oh, of course it isn't. I forgot to change the value that's being displayed down in the actual value itself. Instead of doing post input, I now just want to use my input variable. Let's give that a try. There we are. Now the error seems to have gone away. If I put in a real value, there. Now everything seems to be working fine. Now, what I did up here in order to make that work fine obviously works, it functions, but I don't know that most people would really consider this to be a terribly clear statement. I don't know that it's extremely clear just glancing at that line exactly what it's doing. Hopefully if you look at it for a minute and kind of tear it apart in your mind, you can figure it out. But I think that there's other ways that we could potentially write this that would be more straightforward. One of the ways we could certainly do that would be to use an if statement. If statements in PHP, they're very much in sort of the C style, where they start off with the keyword if, followed by a set of parentheses. That's then typically followed by a set of curly braces. The curly braces are not required. Those can be left off, but the keyword if and the parentheses do have to be there. Like we typically do with if statements in other languages, we need to provide a Boolean expression, some kind of true-false statement here inside the parentheses itself. So we could say something, for example, like if is set input in the post array. That expression will return a true or a false, and then based on that true or false value, the if statement will decide whether it should execute the code that's inside the curly brace, basically the next block of code or the next statement, or if it should not. So in this particular case, what we could do is we could say if there is an input in the post array that is set, we could say set the input variable equal to the value of input from the post array. So that then essentially takes the place of my conditional statement that I had up here above, and I would say that this if statement is quite a bit easier to read. It's a little bit more spaced out, a little bit more straightforward in how it actually works. If I jump back over to the browser and refresh, with an actual value there of 999, it looked like it worked. If I go to the page anew, my error seems to come back. Let's see what we're getting there. Undefined variable input. How'd that come about? I see. Because I declared the input variable inside the if statement, inside those curly braces, it's essentially out of scope. Just like in other languages, we still have to deal with scope in PHP. We'll probably play with that a little bit more later, but for the moment, let me just go ahead and say declare input and set it to a blank. Now, in the browser, a fresh visit to the page, I get no error, just an empty text field. If I put something into the text field and submit, there it works. So what's actually happening? Well, when I go to the page fresh, there is no value in the post array called input, so this is set statement is returning false. Since it returns false, the if statement knows to not execute the statement inside its curly braces, so that line doesn't happen. So then when we get down to the text field and we go to echo input, input has its original value of blank. If I do submit the form, however, then there is a value called input in the post array. The isSet statement here returns true, which causes the if statement to execute the code that's inside its curly braces. So in this case, it does actually execute this statement. So it takes the value from the input value of the post array, puts it into my input variable, replacing the blank. So down in the body, down in the text field itself, input variable there puts in whatever value came from the post array. That all seems to work okay, right? As long as I remember to do all those little things that need to be done. Now, if statements in PHP can have else clauses that go along with them. Again, probably like you've seen in other languages. So I could put an else that goes along with the if there, if I should happen to want to. I could do something there like say set output equal to no value available. Right? First time we've put any value into the output variable, let's see what happens there. If I go to the page fresh, I see no value available where the output is being displayed and the text field is empty. If I put something into the text field, 678, and submit, in that case the if statement was true here. So what it did was it put the value into input and did not set a new value for output. So the output appeared to disappear, but the input stuck around in the text field. With if-else statements, of course, it's always going to be one or the other. It's not logically possible to have the true part of the if and the false part of the if both execute. And just to make sure everybody's clear on it, in both of these cases with the if and the else, I've put a single statement in there, but there's absolutely no reason in PHP that you can't put in more than that. As a matter of fact, let's move on and do something kind of like that. Let's do something with output here inside the true part of my if statement. Maybe let's display some kind of output talking about what type of data it is. Maybe I'll actually use another if statement. PHP has a function called isNumeric. How about I say if the value of input is numeric, then we'll set output equal to that's a number. If I go back over to my browser, visit it fresh, I have no value available. If I put in test, I don't see anything special. If I put in 1, 2, 3, I see that's a number. Following it through, what happens here is when I visited the page fresh, no input given, this initial if statement was not true, this one. So we dropped down to the else that goes along with it, and output became no value available. When I then put in a string value, test I think is what I put, this initial if statement was true, which means we took the value the user gave us, put it into the input variable. We then checked to see if the input from the user test was numeric. The answer there was false, so we did not execute the that's a number line. We instead went on and showed the form to the user again. Third time I ran it, when I did actually give it a numeric value, there was input. That input was a number, so output became that's a number. What I've done here is I've put an if statement inside another if statement. That is perfectly legal, a nested if statement. You can put if statements inside the true section of other if statements or inside the else, the false section of other if statements. You can put if statements inside if statements inside if statements. You can nest if statements to your heart's desire, whatever happens to be required in order to achieve the result that you're actually looking for. What if here I wanted to do something if the input from the user is not numeric? Maybe what I'll do there is I'll say else, if it's not numeric, set output to other data type. There we are. If I jump back over to the browser, visit fresh, I get no input available. If I put in test, I get other data type. If I put in 1, 2, 3, that's a number. That seems to work okay. As it goes, I think that's pretty much the basics of if statements in PHP. Not too much to them other than that. They are, of course, extremely common, something that we will use a lot. They're very flexible. You can use them in lots of different ways. Single selection ifs, ifs with elses, nested ifs, and nested if elses. And they are certainly something that we will continue to see in 500,000 examples from here on going forward.